Hey everyone, this game's quite above my pay grade, but we're going to go through it anyway. So it's Leela Chess Zero playing white against Stockfish, who's playing black. And this is in the TCEC Season 15 SuperFinal. So the first couple of moves are actually from an opening book, so we won't really discuss them too much. It's the King's Indian. So the moves were d4 for Leela, knight f6 for Stockfish, and c4 g6, knight c3 bishop g7, and e4 d6. And then it continues knight f3 castles, bishop e2, e5, castles for white, knight c6, d5, knight to e7 and b4 from white, knight e8 from black, c5 from white, and now f5 and knight d2 and knight f6, and this is the end of the book, and it's quite a double-edged position. So black's vying for the king side attack and white's going for the queen side attack and a possible pawn storm. Now there are two options here for white to play. So white could opt to play f3 here. This is a move, and it's been seen multiple times in Grandmaster games, and black would play f4 and white could play knight c4, followed by g5, where black's now pushing this king side and white's going to push his queen side with a4. Knight g6, bishop a3, and rook f7 has been played many times, followed by b5, bishop f8, b6 from white, and takes on d6 with a very even game. So this is a very double-edged position. Here Leela plays a4 though, so this is what she starts off with. And Stockfish now plays bishop to h6, gaining the dark squares. And Leela wastes no time in pushing these pawns, so a5 even more, which I think is an interesting move. And here I was thinking, what happens if black now takes on e4 to undermine white's pawn structure? Well, knight takes would continue, knight recaptures, captures, and what happens if everything just comes off? The takes, and rook f4. I think white's actually doing better here. So after f3, everything's pretty solid. All the white squares are covered. The bishop might come to f5, but then we'll just come g3 and attack this rook. So black's got to be quite careful. I just think white has a nice space advantage, so this would not trouble white at all. Instead though, Stockfish plays king to g7 rather than take on e4. And Leela now just plays f3 to secure the centre. Stockfish now throws in a check. King moves to h1, and bishop d4 is played by Stockfish, attacking the knight on c3 and pinning it to this rook. So bishop b2 now from Leela, and g5 from Stockfish, pushing this king's pawn. So queen c2 now to reinforce e4, and black now captures on e4. So what happens if white now captures the pawn with the f pawn? Well, if f takes, maybe knight g6 would be played by Stockfish, trying to get into this f4 square, and I think knight f3 is a good move for white here. And if captures, maybe h6 to protect that g pawn, and knight d2 from white. Play could continue with bishop g4, knight c4, and if we get two more captures, queen d7 and g3, white is slightly better again, mainly due to the space advantage, but it's still quite even, and a draw definitely wouldn't be out of the realm of possibilities for Stockfish. Here though, Leela now takes the e-pawn with a d-knight. So what happens if recaptures here? So what happens if knight takes on d5, I was thinking. But this actually runs into knight takes d5, and after knight takes d5, even though black's a pawn up, they're struggling now. So bishop takes d4, takes, and white can capture on d6. Once captures occurs, queen c4, attacking this knight and this d4 pawn. Knight f4 is probably forced, and just queen takes d4, king h6, and now knight takes d6 can be played. Because if knight takes e2, here just comes knight f7, check, and the rook can't pick this up because the queen's going to take this queen, and it's also a fork at the same time, so black's just busted here. So for this reason, taking on d5 is bad, so Stockfish plays bishop f5 instead, pinning this other knight. So queen d2 to get off this pin and also attack this g5 pawn. So h6 from Stockfish to support it. And now Leela plays a6. Bishop d3 was another option. But this could run into bishop takes e4, and after knight takes e4 we're swapping off a lot of pieces. So bishop takes, queen takes, knight takes the pawn again, and now white can play moves like rook fd1 to pin that knight on the d file. If knight e3, rook d2, knight g6, and rook e1, knight is to move back, and even though black's a pawn up, this position's getting worse. Knight c5 to get to knight to e6, so knight d4 defends that square, but then it comes bishop takes, bishop, b takes c5, b takes c5, queen c7. If king takes the bishop here, it ends badly with rook takes e5, so black doesn't want to do that. Queen c7 is a more viable option, and just bishop e4, and it's an even game again. So both sides have got equal material. It's all to play for, but I feel like white's position is slightly stronger here, with all the pieces out, and these pawns are quite weak, especially this e5 pawn and this pawn on b7 covered by this bishop. Leela plays a6 though, attacking b7. So b6 is played, and now Leela captures on d6 with the pawn, recaptures, and she plays knight takes f6. So getting rid of one of these defenders. And rook takes f6 and rook ac1. So Leela's trying to capture this open file. This is a very instructive game actually on how to win these type of endgames. Stockfish now captures on c3. The rook captures and rook c8 is played. There's a lot of captures happening at the moment. Rook takes c8, queen takes, and Leela plays rook c1, gaining this open file, and the queen moves back to d8. And I like this next move by Leela. It's just playing b5 to secure everything, preparing queen b4, and white's got a really nice structure now. And white also has the space advantage, and it's ideal. It's an ideal situation for a computer like Leela. Rook f7 for black, king g1, trying to get the king into the game more. Bishop h7. These are very computer-based moves, you can tell, because they're making like these micro moves just to slowly improve their position. Knight f5 from Stockfish, and now rook c6. Queen f6 from Stockfish, and bishop d3, again improving this bishop's position. Bishop g6, and now queen b4 attacking this pawn. Rook d7 to protect it, and queen e1 from Leela. Threatening to play maybe bishop takes e5 here. I was thinking what happens if knight e7 here, but then just comes rook takes d6, and this e5 pawn is under threat. So if rook takes, bishop takes, and black's losing after bishop takes d3, bishop f6, king takes, and queen c3. King f7, queen takes d3. So this knight e7 move is just an example of how black can go very wrong in this type of position. So white has got many threats. So king f7 gets off this diagonal, and bishop e4 securing the d5 pawn, and the bishop's also safe with this f3 pawn covering it. Knight e7 now attacking the rook. The rook retreats to c4, and king g7, so it goes back to this square. I'm not sure how good this actually is, but white now plays queen c3, preparing maybe rook c7. Queen f7 attacking the d5 square, and maybe preparing for rook c7 as well. So rook c7 is played. So what happens if knight takes d5 here? Well, if this happens, black actually loses to rook d7. If knight takes c3, rook takes f7, bishop takes f7, bishop takes c3, black's actually a piece down, and even though it has an extra pawn in the centre, Leela will easily finish this type of position off. She eats these positions for breakfast. So here Stockfish plays knight g8, protecting the rook, and Leela cleans up now. Bishop takes g6, king takes g6, and she doesn't go for the swap, she plays rook c6. So what she's doing here is attacking this e5 pawn, because the pawn on d6 is pinned. So the king retreats to g7 again, and now bishop a3 attacking this d6 pawn. So Leela's asking a lot of questions here, but what this has done is left this d5 square quite vulnerable. So queen takes d5 now from Stockfish. They have to do this really to get some counterplay, but Leela can now play rook c7, so attacking this rook again. It retreats to e7, And I think this move that Leela plays now actually wins the game pretty much, because queen c6. So this d6 pawn is under attack again. It's pretty much lost. So black's actually forced us to swap queens here. So queen takes c6 and now rook takes c6. Attacking this d6 pawn again, so that pawn is now lost. So Stockfish here plays king f7. So white recaptures and material is now equal again. But white has this dangerous bishop, this dark square bishop, and would you look at that, all of black's pawns are on dark squares. So this is going to be a real fight to keep this position alive for black. Stockfish plays rook e8. Leela retreats the bishop back to a3. And rook c7 is now a big threat for white. So rook a8 to protect this pawn is played. But now comes bishop b2, and just look at all these pawns that are attacked now. Pawn on h6 is attacked. This a7 pawn could be attacked if the rook ever moves, and this e5 pawn is also attacked. Stockfish has no other option than to play knight to e7, attacking the rook on c6. But this leaves the h6 pawn vulnerable to rook takes h6. Leela kindly obliges. Knight f5 now from Stockfish, attacking the rook again, but just retreats it back, and this pawn on e5 is again attacked. Stockfish plays knight to e7, trying to hassle this rook again, but rook d6 avoids this. Knight f5 to hassle again, but now just rook d5, and Leela's slowly got the rook into a decent position. So Stockfish now plays knight to e3, and rook takes e5 is played. Knight c4 attacking the bishop and rook, but rook e2 defends both pieces. Stockfish now plays rook to d8. The rook doesn't need to be on a8 anymore, so they can activate this, but it might be too little too late, to be honest. Rook c2 now from Leela, and knight d6 from Stockfish. So what happens if rook c7 here? So if rook c7, maybe king e8, takes, and rook b7, is white just winning this? Most likely yes, after rook a8. Rook takes b6, knight c7, and bishop c1. King d7, just bishop takes g5. This looks like game over. White's 3 pawns up if black decides to take this pawn on a6, so they can happily resign. So rook c7 wasn't actually played here though. Bishop c1 was, and this just leads into a one endgame anyway. So knight takes b5 from Stockfish. Bishop takes g5, attacking the rook. Rook d7, and just bishop f4 from Leela. So let's just go through these last couple of moves and just look at Leela's technique on how to win this endgame. So king e6, king f2, getting the king up, rook h7, and rook c1. A very preemptive move. Knight d4, bishop e3 to attack the knight. The knight retreats back to b5, and rook h1. White finally has the rook behind the pawns. Knight c7, so Stockfish is getting some counterplay, but I think Leela knows it's won on this side of the board, so she plays g4. Stockfish captures and just h4. Stockfish knight c7, h5, knight d5, and bishop d4 from white. Look at this beautiful bishop just raking down the board, and it can capture these 2 pawns at any point if it's struggling. So white's plan is now to roll these pawns down the board. Knight to e7, bishop b2, and b5 from black. So white now switches their attention to the other side of the board with rook a1, may as well. Knight g8, and just king g3. These pawns are too powerful. They're gonna roll themselves on the board. They're too much for this rook and knight, to be quite frank, and this bishop on b2 is just going to aid in that. This bishop on b2 actually does a brilliant job of keeping this king out with these white squared pawns as well. So b4 from Stockfish, f4 now, king d6, and just f5. What is black to do? Knight e7, f6 attacking the knight, knight d5, and king h4. Knight f4 from Stockfish, king g5. Stockfish now throws in a check, but king f5, knight f8, and the game here is actually adjudicated to win for Leela. So it's adjudicated because white is winning so much. These pawns are frankly unstoppable, and yeah, there's nothing really black can do. So you'd hate to be in a position like black here. But anyway, I just thought this game was a brilliant example of how white cleans up this endgame. So let's have a quick look at it again. Knight e7, rook c4, and what Leela does is just slowly encroach on black's position, gets rid of the white squares, and slowly hassles this d6 pawn, the weakest pawn on the board. And once a favourable swap has occurred, this is pretty much game over. So, and just black here just finds himself in tons of trouble with all these weak pawns. And it's just a great example of a brilliant endgame technique which you would expect from a computer. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed my analysis of this video. Please like and subscribe if you did, and I'll be with you with more chess videos very soon. Thank you very much.